Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my Quake 2 Nightmare difficulty video walkthrough. We are moving through the second chunk of levels. I do not indeed know the name of the levels and how they're broken up. I'm not that familiar with Quake 2, so I do apologise about if I use the wrong terms. But luckily, I did take the time to look at some of the wikis to know exactly what it is that we're killing, so I can give you a little bit more information on the foes that await you in this game. So far, we've only been running into the gunners and the shotgun guards and forces. We are going to get a couple more geezers turning up, a couple more dangerous fellas that are going to do what they do best, which is trying to make our life miserable. And then we have this creature, which is the technician, apparently. Kind of an annoying enemy, that one. Takes a lot more damage than you think he would, considering he's like a future armor head floating around trying to shoot you. But alas, here we find ourselves. And of course, if you've only just tuned into this series, guys, I am going through Quake 2. I'm not using the BFG, I'm not using that like super health item that you can get. And I'm just trying to have as much fun as I can playing this classic game. However, the level design is definitely an interesting beast in this one. And I've mentioned a lot that I prefer Quake 1, I just do. And in the level design I prefer it even more so because there's something that happens in Quake 2 quite a lot, which is a little bit confusing, which is this idea of backtracking through zones you've been in that are separated by load screens. And it makes the game feel like you're constantly going back through territories, and it's a little bit confusing, and a lot of the times the path forward is not necessarily forward, sometimes it's backwards, and through a zone you've already conquered. And in the previous Quake, that just wasn't a thing, and I kind of appreciate that standalone, like, moving forward, go forward, and then hit the next zone and keep going. And if you look into the production of these games, you'll know that, I think one of the developers said that a teleporter is not good level design. And I can understand what they mean when they say that, because of course, it's a Deus Ex Machina to get around joining two connective tissues, isn't it? You didn't create a bridge, you created just a leap of logic between two zones. But sometimes, I think that's all you really need. I think sometimes we have a tendency to overcomplicate things needlessly. And I think it adds to the almost the mysticism of the original Quake, because it does feel like something spellbinding's happening, or something magical, or something that's not quite normal. Whereas in this one to me just feels a little bit like space industrial Doom. And I know that Doom is already quite, you know, spacey and industrially in many ways, but I definitely feel that this is more Doom than it is Quake. Of course, the aiming and the mechanics are very much Quake, but they moved away from that kind of dark fantasy, from that kind of brooding castle and the knights and everything, and some of the occult elements, and then moved into just straight up, you know, high science fiction. And I'm sure plenty of people enjoy that because it's an enjoyable setting and they do it very well. But to me, it just reminds me of the transition from Wolfenstein to Doom, and as sacrosanct as it is, I am not a big Doom guy. I just am not. I never have been. I respect it, I love it, I want to like it more than I do, but I'm not the guy that plays all the brutal mods and is constantly going back and trying out Doom and stuff. There's just something about it that never truly gelled with me as much as I do generally love it. But like lots of things, sometimes you can love something from a distance, you don't necessarily have to engage with it. And that's how I feel about Doom. So when it comes to this being closer to Doom in my opinion than Quake, only in, you know, in its concepts and everything, I feel like they missed an opportunity to take this in a different direction. And of course, Wolfenstein is, you know, it's about Nazis and everything and the World War II stuff, but they're so similar in their gameplay between Doom and Wolfenstein that you can see their spiritual successors, almost sequels in that nature. And it's a necessary step in getting Doom and then getting what Doom went on to do, and of course, I'm not trying to denigrate or take away from what Doom did, because I just don't think you can argue it's up there with one of the most influential shooters ever made. It built a genre. It pretty much invented speedrunning. You know, it did all these wonderful things that it might not get credit for with its multiplayer and its gameplay. And then I become the villain, don't I, coming in and saying, like, I don't like Doom that much, I'm not a big Doom guy. But that's because I'm a Quake guy. Quake is my Doom in many ways. It was my white whale. And I've told stories about how I used to look at an old magazine for Quake 1. And it had pictures, and it was a walkthrough, a written walkthrough in a magazine in like the late 90s. And I never played Quake 1 until I covered it for YouTube, so many, many years later. But I used to look at that magazine and just kind of fantasize and daydream about what it could mean. Oh, be careful here as well, guys. These are the Berserkers, I think they're called. Let me just double check on the wiki I have here. Yeah, that's a Berserker. And in this game, he's kind of busted. He's busted to a point where they've just actually patched him and nerfed some of the stuff they did. In the original Quake 2, he didn't have the ability to do this weird fucking insta-jump that knocks you 9 miles and has like a planet-sized hitbox. Because it was part of the coding of the game, they couldn't quite get to work correctly, so they just didn't include it. Now that it's been redone, they've included a lot of the AIs they couldn't get working the first time to add to this experience, and some of them are really good and really positive, like the AI changes and a couple of tweaks here and there that the purists will spot. But the worst one is the Berserker jumps at you now all the time, and it's almost completely undodgeable. And trust me folks when I say that it's like the most condescending and patronising move ever to be hit with. Because it does 1 damage when it hits you at certain ranges, and it just knocks you and can prove to be this area of denial tool that's way more frustrating than it needs to be. And as crazy as it is, I would rather die instantly than get pushed around a map and bullied by some enemy that's doing a bullshit move. And that's what it feels like when that monster does that. And there's a few bits of this game that are a bit goofy, where they change things and we can't quite validate why they changed them. Like, I don't know if I've mentioned so far, but they changed the damage of the railgun. They nerfed the railgun's damage, and it doesn't make any sense. Because this is a very slow-firing weapon that is very difficult to aim, and when you hit people, they should die. That's the whole point of the railgun, it's a skill cannon. So to take away some of its teeth just seems malicious, and I think they've reverted it in the most recent patch. However, I recorded this months ago, so this is indeed going to be on the raw version of the first release of Quake 2, the retouching. And then again, we've got a couple of the Berserkers in here. And again, circle strafing in these games is so powerful. Making sure that you are never directly in front of enemies to give them the opportunity to do what they want to do is also incredibly powerful, so strafing goes hand in hand. And it's all about mobility, it's all about keeping that damage over time in their face, keeping the damage on them, swapping between your tools, and hopefully, you'll survive. And then when all else fails, make sure you save as frequently as you can so that you don't run into any spots where you can't get out of them. And just be careful with the gunners, as I've mentioned. I mentioned in the previous video that anything that has a gun like that, a tangible bullet weapon, is going to hit scan you, and the hit scan is the most dangerous thing in the game. So you need to respect it. But it works both ways too, so I get access to it as well. And if you can give a player a hit scan, they can do a lot of damage to these monsters, and that's exactly what you're going to see in these episodes. But I want to talk about something else, because I got a comment today, and as much as it was uplifting for the person that put it, it was slightly annoying for me, because it proved that all they did was miss the point of a video I previously made. And I'll give you a little bit of context for the people that see it, or for the people that care. But I made a video when Street Fighter 6 came out saying don't use modern controls. And it was a clickbait video to get views, basically, because Street Fighter was new, modern controls are a big thing, a big controversy in the communities, and I wanted to try and put a title that would get people's attention. And it did. It didn't do crazy, because my channel never does crazy, but it did good for me. But it attracted, you know, the people that want to say that I disagree, which is what discourse is in most media, and that's fair. But what I wanted to say for the title, which I didn't, is you aren't good enough to use modern controls. That was the title I should have used, because that's the sentiment I wanted to get across to people. And I got a lot of people saying like, oh, I've used modern controls, I think they're interesting for this and this and this, and I really like them, I'm glad I tried them. And that's cool, but you're not the person I'm talking to. That video was aimed at people who are new. It's not aimed at people that can play fighting games, that can mess with the new control scheme and see the validity of what it is and see if they can use it and add it to their arsenal. That's literally what I mean when I say you're not good enough to use modern controls. A player who has fundamentals and has some years on fighting games and knows how to play them, they can experiment with modern and see if they like it and see if it works for them. That's exactly what that control scheme is for. This is where the strangeness happens though. That control scheme is not meant for those people. That control scheme is meant for new players. But all it does on a new player is stunt their ability to learn and stunt their ability to play fighting games, because you learn a very niche, specific, like fraction of a fighting game, and it doesn't translate to any other. So all you do is cut off your fucking feet to spite your legs. And I think that that's a really bad philosophy for a new player who's trying to learn. And what ends up happening is that you get these players who start the game, who start with Modern, who start learning and learn some things and have some fun. And then they'll say, well, this is why, you know, that video is so disagreeable to me, because I did this and I did this and I did this. And the issue there is, you also missed the point. And that's the danger here. I'm not saying you can't have fun with a simplified control scheme, dude. Everybody can have fun with a simplified control scheme. That's why the more simple mechanical games are usually the most popular, because you don't have to learn anything to have fun. Why do you think Smash Brothers is so accessible and so enjoyed by so many people? Because you can do really well in Smash Brothers with very little effort and very little knowledge. But here's the kicker. Smash is incredibly technical and high level once you learn things. That game is so much more complex than anybody really knows unless you play it, and if you play it at that level. And you always bump into those people that you meet who think that they're like the best Smash players in the world, and you play them and they don't know anything. Everybody is that person because we're all the king of our own ponds, and then you go out into the bigger ocean and you get fucking swallowed by a whale. That's just the nature of any skill. That's what it is. There's always somebody bigger, there's always somebody faster, there's always somebody stronger, there's always somebody smarter. That is just life. But this player that's had this success, they've done so with the idea that the only reason they could do it is because they used the modern controls. And the reality is, it's just simply not true. They have had success because the entry level was easier, but then they've got to the part where they're beyond the entry point now, and the real hard stuff turns up. Because the aspect of fighting games that nobody wants to accept, the biggest hurdle, is not execution. That's the illusion, that's the fake, stood in front of what the real problem is. And that's the hardest thing to get across to these new players. There are so many people, right now, who are delusional enough to think the reason that they're not at EVO, the reason that they can't beat Daigo, is because they can't throw a fireball. If they could throw a fireball, guys, they would be lethal. They would be so dangerous. And it's just absurd. It's the strangest thing, because anybody that's played a fighting game for long enough knows that the execution is kind of like the false horizon. And then beyond that, there's this grand, just unbelievable expanse of difficult ground to cover that takes a long time. Both physically, mentally, everything, conceptually, it's an unbelievable journey that's in front of you. But they tell themselves the reason that they can't get to the top of this pyramid is because, the Dragon Punch is too awkward, you know, the links are too tight. And you get people using words that they don't even know the meaning to, because they've heard the good players say them. And they think that because they've heard the good players say them, they've inferred their meaning. When a lot of the times it can be very easy to use a term incorrectly. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know, unless you can, get corrected and understand what you're on with. It's just all you're doing is convincing yourself that you're at a place where you're not. And it's like this game, guys. I'm not going to sit in this commentary and pretend to you folks that I'm the top of the pyramid of Quake 2, because I've played this game twice. And you're watching the second time I played it, right here. I'm having a good time with it. I have the mechanical skill to move a mouse and shoot people, and I'm going to record it, and I'm going to show you guys some of the things that I did to survive, and hopefully that might help you. And hey, maybe you're here to listen to me talk, like right now, where we're on this tangent. A lot of people do that. So I can confidently say that hopefully I can make a decent video, because that's generally where my skills are. Quake 2, not so much. I'm not a god at Quake 2. I am capable, but that's about it. I'm not going to delude myself that I can 1v1 Rafa in Quake Champions just because I can beat this game on Nightmare. You know? Because that's not the way of the world, that's not how it works. If I were to even try and compete at that level, there would be years of training in my future, on top of what I have already done when it comes to just games in general, and multiplayer in general. Because it is a chess game. But sadly, you can't get through to these guys. They just don't want to hear it. And I don't really understand it. Because on the one hand, there is a victory to be had here for the person that learns a fighting game in any category, and I think you should be proud if you've done that, because fighting games are really difficult. But as I've said to the person in that comment, learning one fighting game, when it is a incredibly niche and specific framework for that fighting game and for no other, to me, is like building your foundation on sand. It doesn't make sense. You don't learn to play Snap if you want to be a poker champion. It's just not gonna help, because they're not the same game. And that's the reality here. The reality is, when you learn a game under the incorrect control scheme, you think that you're shortcutting yourself to get to the part of the game you want to play, which is the engagement with the player and the brain against brain and the outplaying the other person thinking. But the sad part is, most players don't get to that until a lot later on. And this is the thing that no one seems to want to admit. And you can see it in that video when I play against those new players. You can see that in my gameplay. You can see that in any fighting game gameplay. There's a journey at the start of learning that genre where you need to understand concepts that are so obvious they're almost alien. And the first of those is, it's not always your turn. That sounds like the most patronizing thing you can say to somebody in a multiplayer. Your dog, you're playing another person, they're gonna do stuff. It seems obvious, doesn't it? It seems like, how can you not see this? How can you not understand what's going on? But go watch a bunch of new players play fighting games. They're not considering what the opponent's doing. They're not stopping pressing buttons so that they can go, I wonder what he's gonna press, and I wonder what I can do when he does that. I wonder where I can be and what my options are. They're not doing that. It takes so long for most players to get out of the phase where they're playing a one-player game. It takes so long and it happens so frequently, there are names for it. Several names for this sensation of people playing one-player games. And to me, it just seems like almost wish fulfillment and power fantasy of the most delusional kind. Because you have people thinking that if they can immediately get to the point where they can do a combo without learning one, and they can do special moves without learning them, all of a sudden they're going to get to the point where it's nothing but conditioning and frame traps and space traps and setting bait. And it ain't. It ain't that at all. Because you're not there yet. And if you thought execution was tough, when you get to mind games, it's a different world of tough. And there's things you've never even thought about that now you're thinking about, that they might not be thinking about, that you're thinking about, and is affecting you from doing what you need to do. But you don't get to that, to the true level of that, without having a general, decent, fundamental understanding. But there's this weird scapegoating that goes on in this community, where instead of going, I'm not good enough, I should put the time in and learn, and then having that foundation built, and then getting that rewarding experience, they want to shortcut it, and they want to explain to you, someone who's done it, and understands how satisfying and worthwhile it is as a journey, they want to explain to you why it's a good reason that they didn't. And this is the bit that I find fucking vexing, dude. I find it so vexing, right? You know, if you want to learn Guitar Hero and get really good at Guitar Hero, are you going to play it on a controller? Are you going to use a fucking Xbox 360 controller and use triggers to do fucking trills? Are you going to do that? Why? Why would you do that? The whole reason you play that game is so that you can use that dumb controller. That's the point of it. And unless you're some insanely gifted player who loves Guitar Hero and wants to do something niche that no one else has done, you're not going to do that. Because it doesn't make sense. You don't go practice basketball when you want to learn to be a football player. You don't do that. And for the people that have no idea what I'm talking about here, guys, I'll give you a bit of a brief rundown. In fighting games, when you do special moves, they generally demand that you do some motions on the controller, the analog or the D-pad, depending on what you use, or the joystick, or the hitbox, whatever. You generally have to do some movement, directions, and then a button to do a special move. The most infamous... I suppose you could call it infamous, I think it is. It does live in infamy. both good and bad. Bad for the people that can't do it, good for the people that just know it's universal now, it's video games, it's in the history. But the most famous input is down, down, forward, forward, and then a punch. That is a fireball. It's iconic. There are t-shirts that have got it on, for God's sake. You'll see it all over cabinet designs on fighting games to help people go, this is how you do a special move. That's been around now for what? 40 years? Been around a long time, that notion. Might not quite be 40 years, but it's a long time. It hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is the game's ability to interpret what you're doing. And the ways in which it's changed is that it's more lenient now on the buffer side, so that you get it even when you don't do it as perfectly as it can be done. And that's progress, guys. That right there is a streamlined tool that's meant to make the game easier for new players. They've made the buffer easier. But that's not good enough, apparently. In the past, to make the game easier, they created charge characters, because the motions were tricky. But in the past, the motions were almost frame perfect. So the reason they were tricky is because you had to be a fucking robot to do them. That, perhaps, is a good reason to make something easier. If only the machine can do it, and the guy that commits his whole life to the arcade cabinet, you've probably not done your job to the extent to allow people to engage with your product. So I think that that's a great reason to make something easier. However, they decided to do charge. And if you don't know what a charge character is, guys, you hold a direction for a while, then you press the other direction and you press a button, and it'll do a special move. And it's an easier input, in theory, but the funny thing is, charge became more technical than motion. Because the people that got really good at it had to understand how to do it quickly and how to mask it inside other inputs. So the design that originally started out as being made for the new players who cannot do the other way ended up being quite technical and one of the more difficult ways to play. I personally don't really like charge characters. I can do it, I just don't enjoy the motion. Some players really struggle and avoid those characters for that reason, even though their intention of their design and their invention was for people to have an easier time. So we skip forward a few years, what happens again? They create a character like Ed, and a few other characters in Street Fighter V. Ooh, this is a new enemy, this, ladies and gentlemen. This enemy is really, really dangerous. We've seen him a little bit. Every time he turns up, you want to absolutely obliterate him. He's known as the Parasite. That creature sucks. Make sure he doesn't hit you with the tongue. If he hits you with the tongue, you're in for a bad day. But Ed is a character where to do a special move, you have to press 2 buttons at the same time. Just 2 buttons, same time, like a throw. And that is controversial, because he gets access to these special moves for pressing 2 buttons, where most people have to do a compound motion. They have to do 2 things at the same time, both hands. And they invented that character so that the players who couldn't do charge, who couldn't do motions, would have an easier time of engaging with the game. So do you see how this is working, guys? All the time, these games are trying their best to try to give players an easier time of getting into the game. They want to make that ramp that's very steep a little less steep, a little more incremental, a little bit more accessible. And now we get all the way over to Street Fighter 6, where they've come up with a control scheme which they condescendingly call modern, which to me is unbelievable. It's like calling aim assist modern and mouse and keyboard like retro for aiming in video games. Like that's how offensive that term is, just on a fundamental naming system. Because it's not a modern control scheme. It's a retard control scheme. Let's call it what it is, guys. Let's literally call it what it is. It is a control scheme designed for people who spend more time tasting the bus window than they do engaging with the fucking game. Because this is where I draw a line, right? I can understand if you're disabled and you have something wrong with your hands, you having a hard time doing something when it comes to execution in a game. And I can absolutely support the need for accessibility features and the need for tools to enable a person like that who's got unfortunate on that genetic dice roll and they want to engage and they want to play. That to me is awesome. But your people who aren't disabled, You are fucking lazy. You are lazy and you're coming up with excuses to not put the work in. And this might sound harsh, and this might not be what you want to hear, but it's true. There's this thing with our species, and it winds me up. Everybody wants to be the best, everybody wants to fucking win, but everybody goes lowest common denominator, path of least resistance. Every time. And I don't know why. And of course I do know why. It's because the path that you take where you become a better person, the path where you learn, the path where you develop, and you do the hard thing, the satisfying thing, the meaningful thing, is difficult. And we do everything we can to skirt difficulty. It's one of the reasons I'm making this video here. Because probably, if you go to the achievement sites right now, you will see people putting in debug codes into the console to skip to the end of the level so you never play the game, and then you get to the end of Nightmare and you get the achievement for doing it. That's how dogshit achievements have become. How lazy. And just... they've destroyed themselves from the inside. The people who are meant to care about them the most are the people that have propagated their downfall. And it's one of the reasons why I haven't cared about achievements for a long time, and I never will again. But it's sad. And it's happening every day. And it's such a dangerous precedent because even if you agree, even if you disagree, there's something to be said about instead of doing the work, instead of doing the thing that is hard and skirting the thing that is easy, we make things easier. And I don't know how anybody can think that that's the way forward. Like, quality of life changes are a great thing to speed up something tedious. But when the tedious thing is changing who you are in a philosophical and literal sense, that's something you can't speed up. Like, the whole reason we're here so long is hopefully so that we can learn something. Hopefully that we can develop into a better version of what we started. And everybody's looking for this magic pill and this quick fix and this guru that knows a shortcut. The only thing the guru knows is how to exploit gullible idiots, and it's working. And it's sad. I can't understand how anybody can look at a situation, because you know the counter-argument to a lot of this is, oh, it's not that serious, it's just a game. You know, a lot of people like to say it's just a game. And you can't really argue with a person that says it's just a game, because the value system of the human being is intrinsic to what they themselves value. Anything in its entirety can be devalued, and anything can be valued. It's entirely a reflection of you. So it's just a game doesn't work. Because it becomes, oh, so it's just a dog. Or so it's just your kids. Or so it's just your education. Or so it's just your future. Or so it's just insert whatever you want to put in there. Of course there's value. There's immense value. It all depends on what you are and what you like. You know, I don't like football. The most popular sport in the world. People live and die over football. They fight over football. There are murders over football. It is literal tribal warfare. Tautological nonsense. Yet people absolutely love it. And I can understand why, because I used to love it too. But I don't anymore, because my value system changed. So the second excuse you get here tends to be, oh, I play for fun. It doesn't matter, or it doesn't affect me because I play for fun. Play for fun is this euphemism that gets you out of murder. It's the ultimate excuse for, you know, Cluedo. There was no candlestick, there was no library, I play for fun. And there's nothing wrong with playing for fun. But if you're going to open the door for a blanket excuse like that with absolutely no justification, what if my fun is you having no fun? Where do we go? Where does the discourse go on that conversation? And this is the problem with I play for fun. Fun is subjective, and no one agrees on what fun is. To some people, whipping small kids who've done things wrong at school is fun. Does that sound good to you? Think about those teachers back in the day. They used to carry a fucking ruler around the school, just waiting for somebody to slip up so they could beat a kid. Sounds really fun, doesn't it? Sounds like the kind of fun that gets your fucking blood going. And that kind of person worked in a borstal where they could torture young kids. Young kids that probably never had a chance to begin with. And that's fun for them, you know? So this notion of I do it for fun is difficult for me when it comes to any kind of argument, because Jack the Ripper cut up fucking working girls for fun. You know? It's a fascinating argument. which I'm going to have to continue on the next video because we're not done yet. The next video is going to go over the idea, guys, of instead of learning the hard thing, we will make the thing easier so you don't have to learn anything. You take care now.